All right, welcome to Room 45, 10 a.m. session on day 2 of Nerd Summit. Next up is GitHub Actions in Action by Gleb Bamutov.
Thank you, Audrey. And I have to say, I'm really proud of this title, if you cannot tell. Like really took a while. Yes, it's a topic that I love myself because I think GitHub Actions are super powerful. It's a great synergy of like source control and continuous integration service. So happy to talk about that. Happy to be at Nerd Summit. If you want to follow the slides, I put the link in chat and so. Before I start, I have to talk about the question that's really on my mind a lot lately, the climate crisis. Our Earth is in imminent danger. And if you think that coronavirus is bad, climate crisis will be hundreds times worse, and it cannot be undone. So I'm changing my behavior, right? Electrical power, electrical bicycle, public transportation. Online conferences is a huge thing, right? So no flying. And I'm talking about it, so I'm trying to influence everyone around me. My family is on board, my company is coming on board, but I'm trying to talk to as many people as possible. And I participate, right? In organizations that are trying to solve it, because we cannot do it by ourselves. No one can. So 350 Mass is a great organization, Citizen Climate Lobby, and 10-Minute Heroes, where we try to engage people who don't have time to be members of organizations, but can do something every month. I think we can change it. And even through power of software, I participate in a couple of projects where we do online things for voting, for actions, and so on. If I can help any organization with my skills, I volunteer to help. Here's my email, here's my Twitter handle. Just let me know. I will gladly do it for free for anyone. Okay, switching gears. In this presentation, we'll talk about what GitHub Actions are, a hello world example, and then I'll show a couple of real world things where I'm using GitHub Actions across platforms in parallel. Great power. So let's start. And I wrote a longish blog post where I actually describe the same things in details. So you don't have to just listen to me. You can read it if you prefer reading. I have a bunch of open source projects and lots of blog posts. I've been doing it for a while. So if you want to find anything about me, I'm at gleb.dev. And on Twitter, I'm at Bakhmutov. Unfortunately, Gleb at Twitter was taken, so I cannot grab it. A definition. Continuous integration, or CI for short, is a philosophy that every commit that you push to source control should be built and tested automatically in a clean control environment. Not on your machine, but on a server. If you don't use CI, that means almost like driving a car without oil change. It probably will work for a while, but then it will cease and stop and everything will be broken. There are lots of CI providers, Travis, Circle, lots of them. Very popular are the things that you can self-host or self-manage, like Jenkins, where you can just download a Java app, run it locally on your machine inside your company, and manage yourself. Same with TeamCity. My personal opinion after installing and working with pretty much everything in this list is this is completely not worth it. The amount of time you'll spend managing Jenkins instance is absolutely ridiculous. And you can get much more for the same amount of money if you go with commercial providers. Unless your company's name is like TeamCity or Jenkins or Circle or Travis, you should not be running your own CI. Like that's my personal opinion. If you're trying to set up a CI system, even if you manage yourself or if it's external, every CI configuration file has to do pretty much the same things. You have to get the code from somewhere, you have to install dependencies, you have to build the code, start maybe an application, start testing it, and then report results. And immediately questions arise is, if you install dependencies and tools, well, you have to cache that, otherwise your build will take too long. If you start application, how do you know that it's actually started when it's ready to be tested? And how to stop it? If you're testing your application, you have lots of tests. How do you run those tests in parallel for speed? So everyone can imagine CI setup or configuration being like this nice little box. It just works right out of the box. You just plug in your code and it starts working. And in reality, every CI configuration is kind of like this, a hairy mess of configuration YAML. Here's a typical front-end testing configuration file on Circle, where we specify the Docker image, so we don't have to install too many dependencies. We have to worry about caching, installation, starting, running tests, things like that. As soon as you try to run tests in parallel, well, your setup file grows, and now you have to deal with, well, where's my data coming from? Are all these parallel tests going to collaborate each other, right? Can I specify a common workspace or install things in one workspace and then share them? And what are the flags for running jobs in parallel? People use YAML all the time for configuring, and YAML is not a great configuration language, right? Common things are using little tricks like shared templates and aliases, but the file becomes so hard to understand and validate. So what's the normal CI configuration thing? Well, you go to CI provider docs, you copy example, paste it in your file, push it code, and see if it runs or not, and tells you, oh, it's broken. And then you tweak configuration file again and push it again and see if it works. And it's just a loop of frustration. So we've been doing examples of our tool on different CIs, and every CI is a little bit different, and everything is just becoming very, very complicated and complex. There are some CIs that are doing things differently nowadays. Circle introduced a concept of orbs, and I thought it was a great concept. So I highly recommend watching things in CI world where people are trying to innovate. But in this presentation, I'm going to talk about GitHub Actions, another approach to solving the CI configuration. GitHub Actions came out last year, I believe, and version 1 was not good. I didn't like it. I could never understand the purpose. I could never understand how useful they were because they weren't useful. But now GitHub Actions version 2 came out, and it's a completely different approach, gives you a lot more power. So I personally don't even feel like this. I feel like that. I really want to celebrate because it solves the CI configuration in a great way. So let's see an example. So first we have to understand there's a little bit of confusion. They call GitHub Actions everything, the CI provider and individual steps. So what I like to distinguish is the GitHub workflow, which is the whole configuration file, and inside the workflow you can use actions. The cool thing about actions that these are third-party tools. The third-party pieces of CI actions that you can import and use, and those actions can be written using Docker container, JavaScript, or TypeScript. So here's a typical thing that you can do on GitHub repository right now. Inside your repository, you create .github folder. Usually it keeps things like issue templates, maybe pull request template, things like that. But now you can create workflows. And there you can have as many YAML files as you want. So for example, here I can create hello YAML. So this will be a GitHub workflow file. It can look like this. It can have a name. It can have on event, when will this workflow run, in this case, on every code push. You can also run this on pull request close, as a cron job, lots of different events. And then inside, I want to say, okay, I want to run this on Ubuntu, and I just want to echo hello world. So you define a job, you can have multiple jobs, you can have dependencies, but that's the whole syntax. The cool thing about GitHub Actions is that right out of the box, you can run it on Ubuntu, on Linux, on Windows, and on Mac. And you can also run it on Linux in any Docker image. So when Microsoft purchased GitHub Actions a couple of years ago, the GitHub Actions are built on top of Azure CI. So right, all that power became part of GitHub. You can also have a badge. So you can put the same badge for each workflow into your README, so you know when your workflow is passing or not. And then you can do like cool things. For example, you can specify that this particular workflow will only run on a master branch if any files in particular subfolder change. So imagine you want to say deploy documentation, but not when any, like don't deploy documentation if no docs has changed. So you can define separate workflows for different parts of your large repository. I like to actually create different workflows. One workflow can lint files, another workflow can run unit tests, another workflow can deploy documentation. And then for each one, I just put a badge in my README so I can have in my Markdown file an overview of what is working, what's not working. The best thing about GitHub Actions, I think, is the tight integration with GitHub itself. Every CI now loses because they have a separate service that has to authenticate back to GitHub to check out code, and then usually has to jump through hoops to actually push code back or do something on GitHub. But GitHub Actions are already integrated with GitHub. So for example, I can check out the code. That's easy. I can do my CI actions like build artifacts. How do I push the artifacts back to GitHub? Well, in GitHub Actions, it's all working for you. The GitHub Actions are linked to a particular repo, and when you want to push the code back, there's already a GitHub token specified available for you. You don't have to install nothing. It just works. So here's an example that's like really, really common in my work day-to-day life. We have a lot of JavaScript code, and we want it to be formatted the same way using a tool called Prettier. I usually forget about it. People forget about it. So they push a code, and then I try to run it, and it's formatted differently. I'm like, okay, we'll create a Git hook. So before each commit, we run a tool. And the tool formats the change files. Great. Again, people skip the hooks. Or maybe the GitHub desktop client skips the hooks. Fine. So they push code that hasn't been formatted. So what happens then? I created this little GitHub workflow file. So here are the typical actions inside this workflow. Notice that it has the syntax called uses. So now this workflow uses third-party GitHub action that comes from a different repository. This is how a GitHub workflow can import pieces of CI code from outside. So in this case, I'm saying use actions, check out. This will check out the code. Then install npm tools, and we'll look at this a little bit later. But basically now I'm installing all npm tools with caching, and then run npm run format, the same npm command that formats the code. And now on GitHub, inside the GitHub action container, some files might have changed because they were reformatted. If I were doing things locally, I would commit those files and push them back to the repository. And here's the action that does that. So I'm using a repository from a user, Michael, called publish to GitHub action. So all actions that you uses are just repository name, owner name, repository name. That's it. And GitHub workflow understands, go to that repository, pull the code, run that code inside the CI process. And in this case, I'm saying, I want to use that action, and I want to pass my GitHub token that was created automatically when GitHub workflow runs. So that action code, when it runs inside my CI container, has access so it can push code back to by reformatted code, push it back to the repo. Already set up, I didn't have to create this token. It's created automatically when you use GitHub Actions. And so what happens when someone pushes bad code, all of a sudden you'll see another commit a few seconds later. And see, this is automated publish. It wasn't created by a human person. This was that workflow that ran, formatted the code, noticed file changes, committed them, and then pushed them up. Okay. And so this workflow, the one that I just showed, the one that formats the Prettier, it ran on my bad commit, so you can see a check. And then you look at the logs for GitHub Actions, right, inside the GitHub, and you can see what that action did. As you can see, it actually ran that Michael published to GitHub action, right? And you can see that it actually found change files, committed them, pushed it back to the remote repository. All the actions pretty much one-to-one that I would do personally on my machine in this situation. And then I can see this automated commit. If I inspect its code, it's just formatting. It just took the JavaScript file, formatted, committed, pushed it back. And the interesting thing, when a GitHub action pushes back the code, GitHub knows that this was automated result of an action, so it will not trigger other actions. Otherwise, you can get into like those loops where one action formats the code, pushes, another action runs, formats it differently, pushes, and then they just keep fighting, you know, until the whole internet is busy doing your code formatting. This is what that third-party action is. If you go to that repository, there's just one file. It's just a shell file that runs the tool, commits the code if there are any change files, and then pushes the code back. It's literally one-to-one shell commands. Now, the best thing about GitHub Actions is that I don't have to care about that at all. I don't care about committing code, pushing code. All that complexity sits in a separate repository. The author of that repository wrote it. I'm just using it from my GitHub workflow. GitHub knows how to go to that repository, find the action code, run it, and that's it. That's kind of nice. You're reusing CI code with a single line. I think this shifts responsibility. The third-party GitHub Actions like that is a way to write CI code using shell script in this case, but you can also, and I'll show examples, write it using JavaScript or TypeScript. But who's writing the CI code? It's no longer you, the user, or me, the user of that just needs a workflow. It's the author of a tool, right? Who's writing the code, the CI code, and I'm just using it. So here's the very common problem with all this stuff. I need to install npm dependencies. I have to do npm install on every job, but I also have to do caching, so I don't reinstall the things. So here's how the normal code looks on GitHub. If I want to install npm dependencies myself and run the test, well, I have to check out the code, okay. But then I never remember the caching, right? What's the hash file syntax? I always have to look it up. I can mess it so easily, right? So imagine I look at this problem and I say, well, what does the caching do? Well, it has to look at my package.json file. And if it has changed, it has to do npm install and then upload the new cache. I can write that code in JavaScript. And by the way, I'm using utilities that are provided by GitHub for actually interacting with GitHub workflow cache. So I can actually push code to cache and restore the cache programmatically. They release it as JavaScript code. I write this code, and when I create a repository, this is how I can describe what my action is, you know, the name, who created, like what it needs. In this case, I need node 12, and my JavaScript is an index file. I can push it back to the repository. As long as it's public, anyone can use it as an action, as long as it has like action manifest. So my npm install action is right now available on GitHub. And here's how easy it is now to use. You just check out your code and you run /npm install. And that's it. You can have yarn file, it will use yarn log file. You can have package log file, it will use an npm CI. So because it's just JavaScript code that can intelligently look around, see what needs to be done, and install dependencies. So you never have to remember the syntax. The cool thing about this is everyone talks about 10x developers. Well, I wrote this action once, and now hundreds of developers can use it without even thinking about it. As I said, this one line does restoring npm cache if needed, installs npm, saves it. When you use someone else's GitHub Actions, it's just like using a particular commit. So you can say, I'm using a particular repository at master. So every time GitHub workflow will run, it will go to that repository, grab the latest master commit, and then run that. But that's very dangerous. The code can change. It can be completely different. It can be unsafe. Just don't do that. What I usually do is that I'm saying, when you use that action, go to that repository, find the branch called v1, and use latest commit there. So I feel it's safe, at least for known repositories like my own GitHub tools. You can also create tags, and in that case, it will go to that particular repository and use specific tag, right? So that's nice. And if you really want to be strict, you can go to a specific repository, particular commit, and use only that code. So that's very strict. If you're making an action and you want to write it in JavaScript, if you want GitHub to run it, all the npm dependencies have to be bundled up into a single JavaScript file. It won't run npm install on your actions dependencies. So you have to package everything up into a single file, but there is a tool to do that will just traverse your tree, grab JavaScript, and create a single bundle that GitHub will run. And also they published a whole toolkit for your actions to use. So if you're writing your actions in TypeScript or JavaScript, you can just use actions toolkit, and then you have utilities for logging, for running programs, for finding things, for interacting with cache, like all the little things that you need to interact with the CI platform at runtime. Here are a couple things that GitHub Actions can do for you, or workflows can do for you. Let's say you want to run your test or run your code on specific node version. Well, they published an action called setup node. So in this case, if I want to run node 10, I'll say in my workflow file, use action setup node, and you can give arguments using with the colon syntax. In this case, those arguments or those parameters are defined by the action. So I can just look at the action manifest file, documentation, and see, oh, it accepts node version. Okay, I'll give it node version as a user, and it will install node version 10. The best thing is that in GitHub workflow, you can say this as strategy. You can say, I want a matrix of jobs. I don't want to run a single container, but instead, I want to create a matrix of containers. And in this case, there is just a single variable, so it will be like just a single list of containers. And you can use any variable name and any string value or number value. So in this case, the matrix will have node 10 and 8. And down the line, you can use the value of a variable saying node version, but instead of like hard coding it, you can say from a matrix strategy dot node. So what will happen? GitHub workflow will create 2 jobs. And one job will get matrix node 10. Another job will have matrix node 8. So you'll run your test on node 10 and node 8. These are called expressions. You can define all sorts of crazy things here. Just so I don't forget, GitHub Actions right out of the box for public repositories allow you to run on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and up to 12 parallel jobs, right? And they give such a generous amount of minutes, like, I don't remember exact number, but it's like at least 10 hours per month. So lots of free CI. Okay, so imagine when we moved away from just testing node programs and we want to test a web application. So what do you do to test a web application? Well, you have to install specific version of some specific tool, probably bring Java into the mix, and then install a couple of other libraries and just keep them, really specific, and then sacrifice a code that it actually works and don't touch anything, right? Otherwise you can break it. It's a dangerous thing. Here's how easy it is to actually use end-to-end testing in a real browser nowadays. It's an action that I have written, uses open source Cypress test runner. This is the whole action. If you have end-to-end tests, you can just say, I want to use Cypress.io/GitHub Action. This thing will install dependencies with caching, look at your end-to-end test, start the application if necessary, run the test, shut everything down. And the way you specify additional behavior is through parameters. So if you want to run your test using Chrome browser, you just say with browser Chrome. And the browser is one of the parameters that this particular GitHub action understands. And the good thing is that GitHub Actions already pre-install a couple of browsers. So they have Firefox, Chrome, and the new Microsoft Edge. So you don't even have to install anything else. You just say, I want to run with that particular browser. Let's say you want to record test artifacts. So by default, you can store test artifacts on GitHub Actions, but the UI is bad, right? So we provide a way to record results of your test runs on our SaaS dashboard. So if you want to record, just say record and pass an environment variable, which is a secret key that you define in your GitHub repository. By the way, third-party actions by default don't have access to your environment variables, right? So it's safe. If you want to pass something, you have to do it explicitly, like I'm showing here. If you want to run end-to-end tests that can take a while in parallel and split them up, you just say matrix strategy right here. So now you'll run 3 different containers at the same time. And then using our actions, you can say parallel. And our JavaScript code understands, oh, there are 3 of us. Oh, we have to split the specs. And one container will run first spec, and our container will run second, and so on. So you run everything, but you split the load across 3 containers. And then you look at results in our dashboard, and you see 3 different machines running at the same time, and each one running different spec files, all splitting the load intelligently. And this is all just a couple of arguments. Like, this is the easiest CI configuration that you could possibly imagine, in my opinion. So as I said, generous limits, you get things right out of the box, several versions of Linux, latest Mac OS and Windows. Just, I don't want to say go crazy, but try it. I think this is pretty powerful and generous. So our action can take advantage of that. So if you want to run your tests on each operating system, and each operating system have 2 machines, you can have a strategy. Again, a matrix will be just multiplication of each variable. So 3 values for OS and 2 values for machine. So total 6 permutations. So there'll be 2 machines running on Ubuntu, 2 machines running on Windows, and 2 machines running Mac OS. And again, this will all be intelligently split. So all the tests were split on Mac OS, all the tests was run again and split on Ubuntu, and all the tests ran on 2 machines on Windows. And notice that Ubuntu starts really quickly because Linux is easy to spin up on demand, but Mac OS and Windows, they came a little bit later because it's a full virtual machine boot. So it takes a little bit to start. But after that, it pretty much runs the same, at the same speed. Again, all for free for public repos, like incredible. So to me, the GitHub workflows is very exciting news. It's a powerful continuous integration system that gives you lots of free resources, and the integration with GitHub is just incredible. I don't never have to worry about that again. And GitHub Actions, the things that you can reuse from others, and the things that you can write for yourself in JavaScript, the same language as you program the server, usually nowadays, and the front-end web application. The fact that you can use the same language now to write DevOps code, to me, is just gives me superpower. So thank you so much for listening to me. You can find the slides online, and you can find the blog post, also linked here. And if you want to do something for environment in Massachusetts, go to 10minuteheroes.com and sign up. I'll be happy to answer any questions. But I understand if you don't want to ask any questions and you just want to go back and quickly start trying GitHub Actions right now. Thank you.
Yay, thank you.
So I have a couple of questions.
Absolutely, yes.
I noticed you used secrets.github token. I assume there's a way that you can store secrets. For example, I want to push something to AWS. Can I provide AWS credentials securely somewhere?
Yes, so you can see my screen, right? Right now I'm going to GitHub, right?
Yes.
So right now under settings, they added sections with secrets. And this is where you add new secret, right? So these secrets have to be passed explicitly as environment variable to any action. So this is where you would store all your API keys, and then you pass them explicitly through expression syntax to actions or to your own code. And I believe that GitHub, when you look at the logs, they hide those secrets automatically. So even if you do echo accidentally with that value, they hide the value.
So great, thanks. And a sort of different question is, you said there were a couple of different Linux images that you could choose from. Is there a Linux image that has Docker pre-installed?
Yes.
So I can
Yes.
do like a Docker build.
So I only had it written down somewhere, but you can define like Ubuntu latest, Ubuntu 16, Ubuntu 18 explicitly, or just say Docker and bring your own Docker image. So
what I would like actually is to build a Docker image, which is hard to do inside of a Docker image.
Yeah.
So I'd want an image that has Docker installed, but I'm running parallel, on the image.
I believe they do have Docker, but I've never checked. I never had to build Docker inside Docker on GitHub. So you probably should consult the documentation.
Yeah. Can you, so you can't choose your, I don't know the Azure term for this, but like your AMI, the image of the instance that you want to run on.
No. Unfortunately, it's all predetermined. So if you, in reality, because it's built on top of Azure CI, if you really want more power, you probably want to like use full-blown Azure CI. But I used Azure CI and I built stuff of it, and I was like, the syntax for writing custom code is just no.
So will this, would you still use Circle CI or Travis, or is this going to replace them?
So definitely Travis is not going no more, right? Like Travis is, under the best of circumstances, it was flaky and unreliable before. That's just, they now were purchased by this venture capital or whatever company that laid off all the engineers. And so the Travis CI is pretty much done, I would say, for me. Like I'm not gonna use it for any new projects. Right now, I've used Circle a lot, and we have a great Circle action. It's powerful. Again, great open source plan, right? Lots of free computing resources. Right now, when I start a new repository on GitHub, you know what I reach for? Kind of like by default, is GitHub Actions, right? It's literally copy paste, and it just works. Like I don't even have to think about, oh, I have to add new project and link it back to GitHub. The GitHub Actions, if you have open source project, it just makes so much sense. So unless you have like really complicated things like we do, like we build Docker inside on Circle and push images, I still use Circle for that because I know how to do it, right? But for like my JavaScript utilities and my things, I just reach for GitHub Actions. But it's just me.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is there a GitHub action equivalent to the Circle dashboard so you can see all the artifacts?
Yes, it's not the best, I would say, but if you think about user interface, it's one of those things that could be changed. So for example, this is Actions dashboard, right? I can see all my different workflows. And as you can see, I define lots of them in this repository. It's kind of like an example. So if I want to do, for example, look at parallel tests, I can see all the jobs that run there. I can go inside each one, and then I can see individual steps and jobs where, right? So this is each job, and these are all individual steps. So I can inspect things here. If there are any artifacts, they're available, but you have to download them, right? You get a zip, and that's pretty much it. So Circle has slightly better user interface, right? If you can have like static sites and it will be available right there. But this is one of the things that I expect GitHub, they can catch up like that, right? This is just a different viewer. They can like stick some kind of viewer for artifacts and just catch up.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
One question here. When you point to Docker for your runtime environment, do you specify something in like the Docker registry, or do you upload your own image, or how does that work?
Oh, no, there you just say either public Docker registry, name, organization name, tag, or I believe you can specify private Docker registry and specify like a password or token through secrets again. I wonder if I have something under GitHub Action that I actually show this. 1 second, Docker. So yeah, this is how you specify it for public ones, right? Where you just say container, right? Even though you say it runs on Ubuntu, so it will spin Ubuntu image, and then inside it will fire a container.
Okay, interesting. Cool.
Perfect. I'm really happy. I was looking forward to a trip to Amherst, but now I feel like we're all visiting each other, as guests, right? And actually interacting. So it's really nice.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was really helpful, Gleb.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited about this because I run a lot of CIs because I have to show how to do different things on different CIs. And out of everything right now, Circle and GitHub Actions, they approach the same problem of configuration, and they actually have creative, novel solutions. They approach them very, very differently, right? Circle allows you a template language, so they do a template substitution. GitHub allows you to run any code as part of the action. So very different solutions, but they both make CI configuration so much simpler. So try GitHub Actions.
I will now.
Let me know if you have any questions, right? You can always contact me on Twitter or like find my email, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, I'll stop sharing, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that talk. That was excellent. I don't really know much about GitHub Actions, but they look really cool. So thank you very much. All right, I'm going to stop recording unless anybody else has any other questions, but it doesn't seem like it. So here we go.